Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast, courtesy of SB Nation and CincyJungle.com. I am Anthony Cosenza, and I'm joined by my co-host John Sheeran over in Cincinnati. John, how are you, sir?
I'm doing great. I'm doing very great right now because of
what
we're about to do.
In case you haven't heard, we've got a couple of special guests tonight from SB Nation Stampede Blue. Matt Danley is going to help us preview the Colts upcoming Week 1 game against the Colts at about 9 p.m. Eastern. But now on the line, we have I can't think of a better way to kick off the regular season on this podcast than to have our special guest, Willie Anderson, former Bengals offensive lineman, multi-time Pro Bowler, in my book, Hall of Fame offensive tackle. Mr. Anderson, how are you, sir?
I'm good, guys. Thank you.
Well, thanks for making the time and being on the show. I know you're a busy guy, and even though you're not suiting up in the pads these days, you've got a lot of different things going on. Want to talk about that, but first, I kind of want to kick off with your thoughts on what the Cincinnati Bengals did this offseason. Obviously, they're coming off of two pretty poor seasons, losing seasons after making the playoffs 5 years in a row. They've made some changes. Some people think they're taking a step backward. Some people think they'll take a step forward. What do you see?
I think obviously the changes they made, getting a new left tackle there, and I think the previous season they struggled with the loss of Nightmare and Whitworth. I think bringing a guy come in and play left tackle and kind of showing that up. I'm sure that they're hoping it's going to be a big season for them. I think myself personally it's going to be a magical season, looking for something big to happen. I believe it's Marvin last year coaching with the Bengals, and so I think Marvin wants to go out on a great note. And I think once they get going, get their speed up and things happen for them. I think knowing the offensive line is showing up with the tools they have at running back, quarterback, and receivers. I think it should be a big year in the defense. I think we all feel that the defensive line is going to probably carry this team, in my opinion.
Well, you have seen, you mentioned Marvin Lewis. You've seen a lot of, in your time in Cincinnati, you saw a lot of different coaches, a lot of different head coaches. But when Marvin Lewis came on board, there was a major sense of stability. And I've got kind of a couple questions on that front. I'll start with the fact that were you surprised that Marvin Lewis re-signed with the Bengals this offseason, even after a couple of losing seasons and the team not really living up to expectations?
I did not. I know he and Mr. Brown feel about each other. Marvin has brought the Bengals, to respectability. Yes, he hasn't won a playoff game yet, but I know that irritates people. And I'm sure it irritates him, but I knew he would come on and sign. I think he signed for a one-year deal. I think he's supposed to put all the marbles in right now. And they're going to go real hard and try to get that playoff win, get in the playoffs, and get that win. So I personally did not think, wasn't surprised for me that he signed back. Like I said, I feel it's a one-year deal, what I'm hearing, and I think it's going to be a big deal. I really do believe that.
Talking with former Bengals offensive tackle, Pro Bowl lineman Willie Anderson, really stoked to have him on the show to kick off Week 1 of the regular season going forward here on the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. Willie, your former teammate, TJ Hushmanzada, kind of got some publicity for, I guess, right and wrong reasons, and I don't want to put you in a bad situation here, so I'm not gonna really go too far into this, but TJ's a pretty outspoken guy, and he was like yourself. He was a player who was in the pre-Marvin Lewis era of the Cincinnati Bengals and saw some pretty poor years from the franchise. And then, he was there with Marvin, and he experienced quite a bit of success under Marvin himself. And the team just was a much better team and in a much better place. Really what I want to ask you about is, I don't want you to give us horror stories about the franchise and your time there necessarily, but I'm sure, because you were there about 5 years, if I remember correctly, you were there about 5 years before he was. Yeah, and basically, the fact that he noticed a significant franchise change before, when Marvin Lewis got there and the way the team operated and all of that. I just wanted to get your take on that as well, because I think as fans, people from the outside looking in kind of sense that, but you know, from a guy who experienced a massive amount of success under Marvin Lewis in his tenure there, I'd really like to get your take on, you know, that maybe some of the organizational switches you saw once Lewis took over.
Yeah, so I'll make sure not to say anything that'll get me banned. I'm still hoping out that Mr. Brown comes up with that own Bengals Hall of Fame.
Mm-hmm.
I know the year that I say something crazy, it'll be the year he'll start it, and I'll be locked out of it.
Well, we don't want that.
But you know, obviously people know. It was bad. I mean, it was bad. I mean, players who know it, who played there before, it was a bad time. I think. But looking back now, I think people were doing what they thought was best. But it was a crazy time for us, man. We lost a lot of games, man. We lost a lot of games, and the morale. The morale wasn't as bad as you would think it would be. You know, Keo Spice and I, we talk every night. I think Keo every other day, and every other, you know, blue moon we're going to our Bengals depression thoughts of the 90s. And we think about the 90s and like, oh my God, like what was going on back then? But when Marvin did come, you know, I love to say, I don't know if Marvin even knows this, but I remember when we had just started Dick LeBeau, the press, the local press asked me, I was one of the only guys in the locker room that did after the game. They asked me, they said, well, who do you like to get the Bengals to get? I said, well, I think we should get that guy up in, I think Marvin was in Washington at the time. Because I just thought we needed someone fresh from the outside that experienced winning. I mean, I had played against Marvin's defenses at Baltimore, so I knew his kind of coaching style and aggression. But so he comes up to speed. Like when Marvin first got there, everyone was so crazy about, oh man, he's changing everything. And I remember John Kitten and Marvin both saying, hey, we're not. Only thing we're doing now is to catch up with the rest of the league. It's like the rest of the league has these names that have this stuff in place. We're not doing anything that anyone else is not doing. We're just catching up. And for me, I have been there for so long at the time. Myself and Brad St. Louis was like the only guys left from that mid-90s era. And I came in 96. And Marvin came in 2003. And I remember being out to dinner with the offense. I sat down on the river out there with the offense going to dinner. And Carson was a rookie that year. He wasn't starting that year, but he told John Kidman, he said, man, it's gonna be sure bad to lose got Willie in a year because he's probably old as hell, right? And Kidman was now maybe 28 years old. Carson thought, I had been there for like 15, 17 years, like it was like it felt like I had been. It felt like I had been there for so long because I can say right now, there are guys I played with that, you know, I think Bengal fans and people have forgotten about. You know, they forgotten about it. I played in the era where the Bengals, just not Travis, the Bengals film director, gave me all my games on hard drive. So I'm putting together games and stuff like that, my teaching academy. But I get a chance to watch Johnny Scott and Carl Pickens. And I saw John Copeland at an event down in Mobile, Alabama. Dan Wilkerson, James Francis, all these different things. Because John Carl and Corey Dillon. People forget that Garrison Hurst played with us my rookie year. But from 96 to 02, that first year, 96, I thought it was 8-8. I thought, oh man, the NFL is easy. We'll be winning 2 more years. We'll win 2 more games, and we'll be winning 10 games every year. Well, that didn't happen. You know what I mean? We went from 96 to 88 to 79. My second year with Boomer, 3-13. Third year with Neil O'Donnell. Fourth year, I think, when Jeff Blake started, we got to the Achilles. I forget about 4-12 maybe. You know, 2005, 11. It was just crazy. 2002 was probably the worst season we had. And franchise history, 2-14. But Marvin got there and immediately got that team to an 8-game season. Pretty cool, man. You know, now, what's been done since then, I'm sure there's some things that Marvin would like to do better. Like we all have that should have done. You know what I mean? But he did get it back to respectability. But like I say, I've been hearing, this is going to be his last year coaching with the Bengals. And I think he wants to go out with a bang. So I think once that team kind of sense that, I think we'll see a magical season from the Bengals.
Yeah, I think I definitely think Marvin wants to see the thing through that he's built over so many years with the Cincinnati Bengals. This is the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. We're talking with Bengals legend Willie Anderson. Willie, real quickly, just kind of a side note based on something you said there about, a Bengals Ring of Honor or Hall of Fame, or, in my book, there are a handful of names, a small handful of names that jerseys should not be worn by other folks. And in my book, number 71 is definitely one of those jerseys that should not be worn by anybody else going forward by a Cincinnati Bengals player. Have there been any kind of serious talks about a Ring of Honor, or have you approached Mike Brown about it at all? I mean, I know you've got a pretty good relationship with the team, but that's something I know we all want to see.
Yeah, no, the last 10 years, I know the Bengals, either follow my Twitter account or they hear things I say in the media. Just I'm tired of it. I've been in Atlanta, and I've kind of publicly complaining about it. And what I've heard is not going to happen. I don't think Mr. Brown believes in those kind of things. Doesn't believe in retiring jerseys. Doesn't believe in having a hall. I think the closest thing we got, which I think was a pretty cool thing, was the legend thing for the 50th anniversary.
Mm-hmm.
But I would love to see something that that you get these guys back, because once you get older, man. I've been retired now. This is my 10th season of being retired. And when you start getting older, most guys haven't played as long or had the career that I had and played for the Bengals. I think so many guys have been just forgotten about. And it's kind of, in my opinion, it's kind of sad. Because you see these guys out, and these guys' kids don't even realize that their dad played for the Bengals.
Mm-hmm.
And because there's no mention of them. And that's kind of the sad thing about me. Like, people still remember me because I'm still active, but there's so many guys that played that I talked to, man, with guys from other companies of Cincinnati, but, they don't have any connection to it. My connection was for a long time, Marvin, I played there for a long time, and Paul and Dander, but now Paul is cold now, so my connection is kind of leaving a little bit too. But the last 2 years, I've been able to stay, around the guys, and I know a lot of the players. I train with Carl Martin, know Marvin, but now time is going on. Paul was there for 25 years, 24 years. Now he's gone now, so my commission is kind of leaving a little bit. So you want the commission to be to the team, not toward the coaches, because coaches are going to leave you. But we all played and shed blood. Win or losses, we entertain and played as hard as we could for the Bengals organization. Yeah,
well, you are definitely one of the very, very best to ever suit up for the Bengals, and I hope that some point in the near future, I know a lot of fans will echo this sentiment, but I hope it's at some point in the near future they're gonna do the right thing on that front, retire jerseys, do the Ring of Honor, and honor players like yourself the right way. I hope that especially for not only the fans' sake, but for your sake and former greats, I hope they do that going forward. On a little bit of a lighter note, you had a coaching stint with your former offensive line coach, Paul Alexander, down in Dallas. You coached this summer, and what a group you got to coach down there. I mean, all pros and Pro Bowlers galore. Talk about that experience and maybe what's ahead for you in the coaching game.
Well, out of Atlanta, I run my academy, the Willie Anderson Line Academy, out of Atlanta. So you guys follow me on Twitter and Instagram. Instagram is O-Line Block. But I run an academy. I train high school, college, and pro guys. And in the last 3 summers, I've been in training camps. The Bengals 2 years ago, Cleveland last year, and obviously the Cowboys called me to come to training camp with those guys. But my thing is not in coaching. I respect all NFL coaches. I've even talked to Marvin about this, but I don't think Marvin wanted to do it. About being a consultant, because I feel like NFL rules have changed so much that coaches don't have enough time with their players anymore. I think the position that we all see that's struggling the most is offensive line, because during the season, there's so much putting in game plans. And so for young guys trying to develop, I don't feel like coaches, they said this. I mean, I've been in camp with guys, I've been talking to GMs, and I talked to guys at Duke Tobin and guys around the NFL. Coaches don't have time to develop skills during training camp and during the season because it's so much information and so much game planning. And so people ask me, people say, "Do you want to coach?" I'm like, "No, I don't want to coach. I want to be a consultant." You see, guys, some teams do it, like DeMarcus Ware is doing it for Denver Broncos. Robert Mathis is doing it for the Colts. You see Robert, the pass rush specialist, and it's not really coaching, it's not game planning, but I think sometimes, I think offensive line coaches may feel like I'm stepping on toes, which I don't want to do. So when people ask me to coach the Bengals, it's been talked about forever. Marvin and I, we talked about, certain players. He would text me over the years about certain players. I'm like, well, just bring me up. I work with the guys as a consultant, but, that comes with a whole other job that the NFL is not really understanding yet. Most teams don't understand what it is to be a consultant, a skilled consultant. Now, they bring back old coaches and to talk about stuff, but, after being a guy who still can move around and still can teach and show players whatever the offensive line coach want me to show them, I'm not teaching my own stuff. In Dallas, just what happened that Paul and I, we came up with those techniques from my rookie year to my fifth, sixth year in the league, so Paul knows that I know his techniques the best. Well, I also train guys from Philadelphia. I got guys from Cleveland, guys from the Redskins. I got guys all around the country, so I don't train just particular stuff, but I know I train whatever the coach want me to train on. I try to be my best at being diverse in multiple styles and training guards, center and tackle. So that's what we did it down. We did that for a week and a half, and it was a good time. The guys loved it, and I'm just hoping that they get a build on for maybe a consulting job in the near future in NFL.
Yeah, and how just so our listeners know, how can they? You mentioned kind of I think an Instagram account or Twitter account. How can people follow along kind of what you're doing, how that business is growing, maybe some of the guys you're working with?
Yes, definitely. My Twitter account is Big Willie 7179. My Instagram account is O-Line Block. And my website is Willie Anderson Lineman Academy.net. So all my stuff is on there, a lot of pictures, videos. I have a series of videos that will come out on Vimeo that was a series of teaching, Pass Pro teaching videos. So that's kind of what I'm at. I'm all about teaching. I have a good following online right now. People following want to learn more about offensive line plays. So I think, if your favorite team is winning or losing, most likely it's because of the offensive line. So I think people should get more in tune about learning about offensive line. I mean, with the team to win, pretty much it's your O lineman and D lineman that's going to help either win or lose games.
Yep, absolutely. We'll get you out of here on this one quick little rapid fire question here, Willie. Toughest matchup you ever had in the pros, either edge defender or interior lineman you maybe had to help out with, or who was a guy that just was a really difficult matchup for you? Not that you ever showed very many vulnerabilities, but
I've had my battles in my 13 years. I've given up 15 sacks. But my toughest was a guy. It's actually a psycho too. And if you go to my Twitter account, my Instagram, I have videos of me playing this guy. It's the late great Reggie White.
Oh, yeah.
It was the only time in my career in '98, my 30 in the league, that I faced someone just as strong as I am. I was bigger than him, 340 pounds. He was about 300 pounds. But he was like 35, 36, way stronger than me. And I likened it as a kid wrestling with his dad in the backyard. So I shut him out, but man, he beat me up. I got him up one time. He humped me once, but I landed on my feet. He did it. I was able to block him out, but the entire game, man, he just put pressure on me as far as just pounding my body. He wasn't playing the full game. He was an older guy, but he was getting rest. I'm like, damn, he's going to the sideline getting rest. Well, I'm out here playing every down. Like folks don't realize that about offensive linemen.
Yeah.
We play every down.
Yep.
And we have a great Hall of Fame like Reggie White getting rest and coming on third down. Man, it's hell to pay. But I have those videos on my Instagram page and my Twitter account when we go and get Reggie. By far the best guy ever. That's not. It's a surprising answer because I mean we just he retired a little bit after Don't forget when I played like that. When I came in an era when '96, it was all about Terry Genaro calling a running game. The running game, every NFL team had a running game. Pittsburgh with Jerome Bettis, Eddie Jones, the Titans. You know, you had Fred Taylor and those guys down in Jackson, but every NFL team was about running the football. But I always say when we paid Carson that $100 million in 2005, my 10th year, I saw a change in dynamics in the NFL. It became about a quarterback league, so it became about protecting the quarterback. So a guy like Reggie White played in the 80s into the 90s, but you're seeing more dynamic pass rush guys now, I think, in more years than ever because there's more passing going on. You know what I mean? So don't forget about it. You know, I played against Reggie White and against Dwight Friend and Robert Mathis. I played against Bruce Smith. I saw Javon Curtis. I saw James Harrison. You know what I mean? So playing a long time, I had a chance to see different rushers. I played against Strahan, all the different guys, Warren Sapp, all the guys. So I played in the heyday of pass rushers. I think I played in the heyday of when offensive tackles were a group of guys that we were all fighting for 2 all-pro slots. There's about 8 guys that you consider that are really neat. You know what I mean? So NFL is definitely involved in changes. You see more and more guys that are big-time pass rushers now.
Yeah. Well, I hope our listeners will go and check out some of those videos of you against Reggie White because that's an epic battle there. And appreciate all of your time. Again, this is Willie Anderson, Bengals legend, joining us on the program. We'll be sure to pass the word along about what you're doing with your coaching academy. And anytime you want to come back on the program, man, we'd love to have you.
Thank you, bro.
All right. Appreciate it. That was Willie Anderson, former Bengals offensive lineman and multi-time Pro Bowler with the Cincinnati Bengals. And pretty stoked. I mean, in a matter of a month, we had basically the 2 best Bengals offensive linemen ever. I mean, Andrew Whitworth is in that discussion as well. But, man, that's pretty cool. John, I hope I know we wanted to get you to ask some questions there. Unfortunately, just him being on the phone was a little difficult to volley back and forth there, but hopefully you enjoyed the interview nonetheless.
That was starstrucking.
Yeah,
he was my favorite growing up, like when I first started watching. So that was incredible.
Yeah, and you are a big lineman guy, so I'm sure I'm sure you really enjoy that. That was cool. I'm glad. It's pretty cool to hear that he's doing this academy thing. He made a lot of money in the NFL. He could just kind of hang out and do his thing. Maybe do some business stuff, but he's actually trying to do some stuff and help out the next generation of NFL linemen with his academy and stuff. So pretty cool stuff there. We've got a few minutes, John, before we're going to be joined by Matt Danley of Stampede Blue of SB Nation to preview the Colts game. But I kind of wanted to go here and take a couple minutes here and tell me about what you thought of the Bengals' final roster, some of the biggest surprises, either makes or cuts. And one thing I'm really interested to hear about from you is the whole Michael Johnson thing, because he gets cut and then a day later he signs, and it sounds like he signs basically a 1-year deal. It's kind of the same contract he had. So your thoughts on that and how the roster is shaping up going into week 1.
So, yeah, well, let's just start with Johnson because I think a lot of people either expected or just wanted this to be Johnson's or for him to get cut, just because, the progress that Willis and Hubbard showed in the preseason was promising. But what we had to remember was that Johnson was still starting at defensive end across from Carlos Dunlap. He was starting at nickel defensive tackle next to Geno Atkins on 3rd down. So all of preseason, there was no indication that Johnson was getting phased out in favor of Willis and Hubbard. Obviously, those two got plenty of reps behind him and plenty of experience in rotating in and out with him. But there was no indication that, Johnson was on the way out. Like we saw with Chris Baker, he got 9 snaps in the first 2 preseason games combined or something ridiculous like that. So it was obvious to see him on the way out because of the way Billings progressed. It was obvious to see Ryan Hewitt get phased out because he just wasn't using the offense at all. Michael Johnson, while he didn't produce on the defensive line this preseason, was still used a lot. And you can obviously tell which guys are on the way out, which guys are still in the plans for 2018, but just how they're used in the preseason. So Johnson was the starter in the preseason, and even though he didn't do well, by all indications, it was just expected that he would make the team. So when he was cut, it was a shock to me because I just didn't expect that to happen. It was just such a rash decision for them to make because they didn't show any signs of that happening. But they only cut him because they wanted to keep Devontae Harris on the initial 53-man roster, so then they could have him return from injured reserve, which they then later put him on as soon as Johnson, wasn't signed after a day, so they could work that whole process out. But I don't think I don't think keeping Johnson makes them much worse on the defensive line. It's obviously an experienced body who they trust in run defense and who is better rushing the passer from inside. The less he plays, the more effective he is. And I do think that they're going to get Willis and Hubbard rotated in with him more and more as the season goes on, and the pass rushing will be much better because of that as well. Other than that, I think the biggest surprise was keeping 7 receivers, and we all thought it was going to come down to either Auden Tate or Cody Core, mainly because of special teams. And obviously, they still trust Core to man that gunner position on special teams, and they don't trust Tate to do that because if they did trust Tate, then Core still wouldn't be here. So they still are reliant on Core for that because they can't rely on Tate for that, but they obviously still like the potential that Tate has at 21 years old and the limited things that he showed, but he's still obviously has a long way to go because for the good plays that he showed in preseason, there was just as many knucklehead plays that cost the team a little bit.
Yeah, and obviously I think that one, what was it, against the Bills maybe, it was a throw by Barkley. It kind of went off his head and turned into an interception in a game that the Bengals were thoroughly dominating, and they were kind of on the move there as well. And Barkley had kind of played well on that front. Now, I quick thoughts on quarterback group. You might have touched on that a little bit. I mean, Barkley now he's kind of shelved because of the injury. It probably was going to come to Driscoll anyway. But you kind of got to feel a little bit for Barkley because, that was his stage a little bit in that finale to, he's got the start. He kind of had the opportunity to, get out there. And of course, 3-4 plays in, he gets hurt and is on kind of a cheap shot to his knee. And so now he's gone. Driscoll is the guy. Are you pretty confident in that? They have Christian Hackenberg on the practice squad, who was a pretty decent college player, but my God, he has not looked good for pros. So, what do you make of the quarterback spot?
I think I'm going to have to disagree with you. I think because Barkley was given second team reps in the 3rd preseason game, I think he did slightly have the inside track to the job over Driscoll. And, we don't always agree with the coach's decisions and roster making, but I think that was kind of the direction that they were going. He did start the final preseason game. I think he did, for whatever reason, have a slight edge over Driscoll, and it was just unfortunate for him that he ended up getting hurt in the first drive, and Driscoll basically got the job by default. But because they put him on IR and not just cut him all together, I think they still have whatever future plans that they have for a guy on a 2-year contract on his 4th team. So I think they're just going to roll with Driscoll now. If he does well, then they can release Barkley at the end of the year and they have no need for him. But if Driscoll has to end up playing and doesn't do well, then I guess they're going to give Barkley another shot next year. But don't expect anything from Hackenberg. I mean, come on.
Yeah. That was an odd one, to say the least. We're going to get to our other special guest in the evening in just a second here, but just a couple of quick questions. One was from someone in our live YouTube chat. Was it Dean Burke? Yeah. Why did Erickson make the roster? You talked about the fact that the Bengals kept 7 receivers, and Lord only knows what's going on with Cody Core and all of that stuff. I thought Erickson, and I called it on this show, I thought he was going to be cut at some point. He actually ended up playing pretty well in the preseason again. I don't think he's ever going to be a major force in the offense. I think it's just he's return guy, maybe get you 10, 15 catches a year. I think that's just who he is. But is that worth a roster spot, especially with the league kind of cracking down on kickoffs and that whole situation? Is he really worth the roster spot? I mean, I know he's a try hard guy, and he just has a knack for making the big play, especially in the preseason. But
do you want to say his grit?
Yeah, grit.
Plenty of grit. Motor,
grit, yeah.
I think he impressed as a receiver in just the limited time that he had. I wouldn't think it's that far of a fetch to say he's one of the more reliable receivers that they have just based off experience, because we still need to see Ross prove it in the regular season. We still need to see Boyd completely bounce back from last year. So I think they like whatever stability that he brings at the slot receiver. I think he's still a decent option. I think if they did give him an extended role, he could make a little something out of it. I don't think he impressed that much as a returner, but I think just because Darius Phillips is a rookie, they may not have full confidence in him. And that's funny because Erickson did take the job from Brandon Tate a couple years ago as a rookie because he dominated as a returner. He hasn't shown that since 2016. So I think it was just a combination of whatever stability he brings as a slot receiver, as a true backup to Boyd there, and just insurance in case something happens to Phillips maybe.
Yeah, and you mentioned 2016, great returner, had led some of the league in the kickoff. I think it was kickoff return yardage, and average yards per kickoff return. I think he was up there on some of those. But 2017 was a bit of a disappointment. So I kind of thought he was on the bubble, was not. Quickly, John, your thoughts on the cornerback group? I've been asked about this a lot. The Bengals said that they wanted to maybe add some depth. They put Kavaria Russell on the practice squad. They still have the 3 former first-round picks atop the depth chart. But we're so used to, all these former first-round picks in the secondary, Reggie Nelson and Adam Jones and those guys are gone now. They've got the 3 at the cornerback position. Are you worried about the depth that they have there? Or are you pretty confident in what they have behind the big 3, if you will?
Yeah, they said they need depth, but I thought they had their 4th corner in Russell. I thought he played very well in the preseason the time he was out there, and for whatever reason, he didn't make I guess he didn't make the roster because they wanted to have Devontae Harris come back in case he can. But I think he could have very well gotten picked up by another team in waivers, just based off his preseason play. They obviously have a lot of faith in Tony McRae, who admittedly played well in that 3rd preseason game. But I think Russell, if he's given a chance to play in case something happens with one of their starters, he can be at least serviceable there. And I think I personally would be comfortable with Russell. I don't know if there's any names out there besides. I don't know if Rashad Breeland's still available, but if he is, he's obviously a name to watch. But I think they're okay. I don't expect Darius Phillips to play that much. I think it's just McRae's giving me that first guy off the bench, and if he happens to come off, we'll see what happens. But I think with Russell that they should be fine.
Yeah, and the Bengals, when they do add a veteran, a lot of times, yes, they've done the waiver wire stuff, but they also like to add veterans that I think it's after week 2 or something where their contracts aren't fully guaranteed, and they kind of save a little cap space, a little money on that front. So, and they also do it to see kind of what they have in the first couple of weeks, and maybe they kind of say, well, we want to tweak some things based on that. Speaking of the first couple of weeks of the NFL preseason, it's actual football time, and it's week 1. The Bengals are playing the Colts, and it's very odd because the Bengals are playing the Colts for the 2nd time in as many weeks. I don't remember really the Bengals ever, or any team really, for that matter, kind of playing a team in the final week of the preseason and starting off their season with that. Kind of a weird deal. But to help us preview the upcoming week 1 matchup with the Indianapolis Colts, we have Matt Danley at Stampede Blue, who is not only a writer there, but he is a podcaster there. How are you, sir?
Good. How you guys doing, man?
Good. Thanks for coming on. Thanks for making the time. Matt, what I like to do, aside from just diving into, the nitty gritty, I always like to ask my guests, especially within the SBN network, how they got involved in writing, how they got involved in podcasting, their background, and be it as a fan of the team or what have you, just kind of your affiliation with the Indianapolis Colts and how you kind of came to work for SB Nation.
Well, make a long story short, just started out of the blue on my own to begin with. Had my own blog set up, started writing about the Colts, doing a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and then ended up that progressing into other opportunities, and basically what it turned out to be, and I don't know if you guys can relate to this or not, but, my wife's a sweet gal. But every time that she would, her and I would get into conversations, I'd be talking about the game, and I could just see the look in her eye like, I really don't care. You know what I'm saying? And so I felt like I had something to say, or at least, that's kind of the way it was. So I started writing. Obviously, it was pretty terrible. That was about 6-7 years ago. And then, it's just become a passion of mine. And throughout different websites and doing some other stuff there. I came over to Stampede Blue, I think about a year and a half ago or something, but I've been podcasting I came up with a site that basically did nothing but metrics for quarterbacks. It was QB Mecca. I did a podcast for that. I did Locked On Colts for a little bit over a year, the podcast for them. Came over to Stampede Blue, continued to write while Josh Wilson was still in charge, and then things have progressed quite a bit since Brett has been at the site and stuff like that. So it's been fun. It's a lot of new faces, a lot of new ideas. It's really good. We got a good team over there at Stampede Blue. So I mean, it's fun to work with other guys that are pretty passionate about the team. But I mean, at the same time, you guys know as well as I do, most of the time we're the most critical of our team, just the same. I feel like I honestly feel like if you've done it this long, unless you're just a complete blowhard, you've got at least some sense of objectivity in your brain, and that's what's fun, because you can have real conversations with people, and there's no BS in it. There's none of that. So I mean, you feel like you're getting smarter by the day the more people you're around in that regard. And just been doing the Colts cast for the better part of a year now for Stampede Blue as well, and it's doing well, and a lot of good things in the making, as you probably know, for a lot of what we're doing right now. So
absolutely, yeah, we might be announcing some things on that same front in a little bit ourselves. So
pretty exciting.
Yeah, our listeners should stay tuned potentially for that. So Matt, I guess you mentioned the site and your work on quarterback data. I guess it's a pretty good segue to start with, and that's the whole Andrew Luck saga. And one of the last times Bengals fans unfortunately saw Andrew Luck was in the 2014 wildcard round. The Bengals were absolutely decimated by injury that game, but Andrew Luck absolutely tore him apart, especially in the second half. And since, I think he's been away from football at least, a year and a half. There's been some improvement, some talk of improvements. How has he looked? How is he feeling? I'm sure there's a lot of player speak, coach speak, saying, oh, everything's rosy. But are you seeing some issues, or what should we expect, especially, first regular season game in a number of years, or not a number of years, but, basically a year plus. What should we come to expect to see from Andrew Luck this Sunday?
No, I think the good thing that you see that before anything with him throwing, we obviously saw that he was physically, in tip top. That's the good thing. You see him, everything that he does, you can see that he's just more foundationally built muscle wise. His core stronger, his extremity, his arms are obviously naturally bigger, but they're not so bulky that things are out of whack. You know what I mean? So he looks good. I'm not worried about him at all. I'm truly not. He's been able to continue to throw the ball. I mean, he threw the ball down, and we hear this all the time, whether it's, one station or another. He's only thrown the ball 18 yards in the preseason. What's going on? Calm down. He was throwing 45 and 50-yard bombs with ease in training camp practices. He was crisp. He's smart. He's focused. That's who he is to begin with. You know what I mean? So it's not that much of a stretch as far as mentally, but he's come back from a lot too. So I think you guys saw the picture of him when he was really thin, right? A year ago? I mean, did you guys ever see that? I think he was holding up a book or something of the sort.
Yeah.
He looked like he hadn't been lifting or doing too much for a little while. Yeah.
He looked like a stumble bum, right? I mean, a skinny hobo walking around with sunken cheeks. It was kind of scary, but he does talk about how that's become, something that he's overcome mentally. He had to overcome all that stuff mentally. So I think you're getting not only a driven Andrew Luck who could physically and reasonably return to his 2016 form, but you're also getting a guy who's mentally just ready to tear this season apart. And I think that that's something that, obviously, if there was any lingering effects to his shoulder, that would be a scary thought, because he's not scared of contact. He's going to throw the ball as often as possible. And if anything, his past several seasons are any indication, we're talking well over 500 attempts, no matter what. That's blinking an eye. So I think that, just in general, he's looked good. I would have no reason to suspect he's not. He's never come out and said, no, that sucked, or I'm hurting, or anything. Ever since he's been back, it's just been basically a person training a specific part of his body that has had to become, has had to be rehabbed. That's all that I've ever gotten from him as far as his explanations on any soreness or anything like that. And he's pumped, man. He likes the contact. He feels like he's getting himself back into the back into the season of football, and actually the being with the teammates and actually having a common goal. I think that he's in great shape, both physically and mentally. I think that can do nothing but good for the Colts for sure.
Yeah, it's nice to see weekly mental updates from Luck at his Twitter handle at Captain Andrew Luck when he's on the battlefield every week. So that's always nice to see. It's always nice to get in the mind of an NFL quarterback. Bengals fans know about Luck. They know about T.Y. Hilton. They may even know about Quentin Nelson and the couple of other offensive linemen, Jack Doyle as well. I don't think a lot of people know, just in general, any names besides Marcus Hunt on the defense. This group is kind of, from the national perspective, scrutinized, and just in the Andrew Luck era, I guess the defense has never been the team's strong suit ever since Peyton Manning left. Who are some names that Bengals fans should keep an eye on as they go against the Bengals offense?
Sure. And in the Pagano era, we'll just put it like that, at very least since 2012 and probably even to 2010, the Colts defense has been awful. And under Pagano, there was a couple seasons where it was really like some of the worst that the Colts have put on the field in 30 years. So that's obviously you're moving from that, but you're also changing scheme. And I think that last year's draft with Ballard, where he picked up Malik Hooker and he grabbed Quincy Wilson, we could see that there was a scheme change coming on defense. You could see that they were drafting for that type of a squad, and you could see the makings of that, whether it was more of a cover 3 or what's become of it now, a Tampa 2 style based defense. You've seen the parts, you've seen the moving parts being put into place before it was actually done. When you look at some of the guys on this team, I mean, and look, they are scrutinized, and there's a reason for it, but it's because people don't know them. There is talent on this team. If we're talking, are they a top half of the league defense? I don't think you're going there. I think you're looking at probably somewhere between 20 and 25th, and I think that's probably a high mark for them. I'll be honest with you. But they have the potential to be in between that 15 and 20 mark. So, I mean, just to kind of put benchmarks out there, they've got plenty of youth now, because they've got 4 of their 6 linebackers are rookies this year. One of them's a second-year guy in Anthony Walker, and Najee Good's the only veteran guy there in that mix. He brings he brings what a guy who's going to be playing Sam, brings. He's a physical dude. He's good. He's smart. He's going to be able to help with this. But they've got rookie play caller, undrafted free agent, Sky Moore, who's going to get a ton of snaps at Mike. He was a guy who had 14 interceptions in college. So he's a guy who definitely is able to patrol the field. He's fast. He's a hard hitter right now. He's not a controlled tackler, which he needs to become, but he's very good at getting to the spot. Darius Leonard's a guy, a lot of people were questioning that pick by Chris Ballard. And I wasn't really on his train either until I watched post-draft a little bit more. And I thought, man, I can't believe that I came away with the notion of what I did previous to the draft. But I thought that he's shown that he can be into the passing lanes. He's a guy who is going to be able to hit. He's really good in pursuit, which makes him obviously ideal for the wheel spot. And he's going to be able to get in the mix with the pass rush. And I think that's something that the Colts are really going to use this year, and probably won't be expected all that much in the first half of the season, because everything's new. Nobody really has any tendencies on this group yet. I think Leonard is probably, honestly, the playmaker of the team. Sky Moore, that, like I said, the Mike is doing pretty well. Danico Autry is a guy that we picked up in the offseason, and he has shown some explosion, some ability to track down the quarterback, even present some pressure from the interior. But he's also a guy who's really skilled as far as technician-wise. He's a technician with his hands. You can see it in practice. And then he gets that explosion in there, and that wreaks havoc. How that'll play out in the season is obviously a different story than what you see in training camp and preseason. But you just never know. But so far, he looks the part, I think. And defensive end pass rush this year from the outside is going to be a real question mark for the Colts. Jabal Sheard is there, and you mentioned him, but they picked up a pretty exciting rookie, Kamiko Toure. They got, basically this experiment going on with Terrell Basham and then Marcus Hunt right now, which is not scaring any opposing offenses. I mean, you guys know about Hunt. Last year he played his ass off. He played really well. And this year you get a guy who's back into a system that he didn't really succeed all that well in before coming to the 3-4 with the Colts last year. Now you're looking at Hassan Ridgeway, who he's going to be able to present some pressure. But right now the edge is not a scary bunch. I think that if you look at what Toure has athletically and skill-wise right now, and just his body build in general, his explosion is out of control. I think that you're going to see a guy who could really have some really nice ceiling in the NFL. And he's there, but he's a rookie. You just don't know what you're going to get. Obviously, on the back end, you've got Malik Hooker. Clayton Gathers is a guy who's been pretty solid there. But, the Colts, I think that we like what they've got on their base coverage group. Quincy Wilson and Pierre Desir, Kenny Moore and Nate Hairston, all those guys got a lot of snaps last year. Not so much Wilson, but Desir got a ton of snaps last year there. And this is it's a solid group. They're not going to scare anybody, but they've really got to get into this to where they're dropping in their zones. They've really got to be a break on the ball type group. And that's something that they're really just kind of learning to do right now. But I think that look, if you didn't love Quincy Wilson coming out of college, I don't know what you were watching, right? He shows that in the games. He shows everything that people saw in him coming in the draft process. Desir's more of the veteran there. And then you've got the experience with Matthias Farley as a safety as well. But you've also got the big playability out of Malik Hooker. And I think Clayton Gathers adds a little bit of punch just behind that linebacker group as well, to be a little more of a physical tool for the guys coming across the middle there.
Talking with Matt Danley at SB Nation, Stampede Blue, and the Colts cast over at their website there. And Matt, if you get a chance, you should listen to the first part of our show when we interviewed former Bengals offensive tackle Willie Anderson, and he talked about going up against Freeney and Mathis and all those guys. It was kind of a fun conversation there. But but switching gears, since you talked a lot about the defense and the defensive line, there was a question in our live YouTube chat. I believe it was from Dean Burke, since he asked kind of about both. I'm going to switch it to O-line. There's some health questions there. Anthony Costanzo, which is eerily similar to my name, by the way. That's really weird. But there's his issue. Nelson is obviously probably poised to be a very dominant player in the league for a really long time. But it seems as if there's kind of a lot of question marks elsewhere, along with Costanzo's injury. The Bengals can get after the passer. They may still struggle a little bit against the run. Talk about the offensive line and maybe what you see ahead in week one.
It's really interesting because this is a group that we don't really know a lot about, to be quite honest. Costanzo was practicing today. He was limited. I don't think he took part in any of the team stuff, but he was back. That's big for Costanzo. Costanzo's been one of the most durable linemen the Colts have ever had. And he's a guy who's been in there, and it looks like he's coming back. So that's huge news. Even if he's not back this week, he's back for week 2. That's either way, anyway you slice it, that's great news for the Colts. But, yes, he's an issue. I think that he's going to play, but we still don't know. We know what Matt Slauson brings, the physical nature of the game on the interior of the offensive line. Him and Kelly and Nelson there, that's a nice bully group. Now, can they form the chemistry to actually put that, to actually execute this game plan? That's what we don't know yet. And that's the problem with this group. Kelly's been up and down. He's been injured. He's back. He's been completely injury-free as far as I can remember throughout training camp and all that. So he's fine. Nelson is an absolute bully, and Slauson kind of sets the tone there for this group. Like I said, he's not exactly a top-end guard in the league. So you hope that between those 3 guys that they can compensate for each other a little bit in order to be more physical than the group across from them. And that's kind of where the Colts, I think, their hopes are, because there's so much fundamentals and so much to learn with that group in general, I think, especially taking on a team like Cincinnati, who has a pretty decent front line there that's going to end up being trouble for a lot of NFL offenses, quite honestly. But behind him, you've got Braden Smith, the rookie, and I think that he is a guy who's definitely come a long ways through training camp. They've had him at guard. He's naturally a guard, but they moved him out to right tackle. Some of the aforementioned issues with injuries throughout camp that you mentioned. He looked awful. I mean, god awful at first. It was just really bad. And then you get him outside, and he started to progress a little bit here and there. They kept playing him there, and I was surprised that they didn't end the experiment after the first couple of days. They kept with it, though, and he's done pretty darn well. So I think Braden Smith's a guy there that's at maybe second or third realistically on the depth chart at right tackle as well. Right now, they've got Joe Haeg as the unofficial starter at right tackle, which I think is a pretty solid deal. Joe Haeg's okay. He's not great. He's not going to dominate any elite pass rushers, even probably 80% of the time. He's going to probably hope that he can get guys away from Andrew Luck enough to where Andrew Luck can move a little bit in the pocket and still survive. That's not what you want to hear right now to your right tackle spot, but unfortunately, that's kind of where we're at. There's a few weaknesses in this offensive line, but it's more of the fact that the chemistry is not formed yet, and there's still some inconsistencies with some guys, injuries in depth. Denzel Good has been out back and forth for the past few weeks. And outside of, I mean, Jamarcus Webb is the slowest human being on earth, but he did a pretty solid job in his pass sets, I thought, throughout the preseason. So I think that he can, I mean, he's decent depth. He's not great depth, but he's decent enough depth, and he's better than what the Colts actually signed to be there, which was Austin Howard this offseason. He's not even on the team. They released him. So that's not good. But you see a lot of the young guys in here, and they've got some depth, and that's the first time that they've had, I think, legitimate depth in quite a while. So I'm excited to see what these guys do, especially protection-wise, running game-wise. That's even a bigger question for me. They have the ability to be a really solid run offensive line. They've got some guys running behind them that are going to be able to pick up huge chunks of yardage in just a small amount of time. But all of that, obviously, like I said, has to be executed. You have to have Marlon Mack be able to run between the tackles and only bounce outside when it's necessary, and vice versa. A guy even smaller than him, Nyheim Hines, you've got to tell him to bust it out occasionally and quit running through up the back of your offensive lineman. You know, I mean, the vision there seems to be double vision. You throw them two together, and they're a pretty darn good back. I think what the Colts offer in the run game is still very unknown as well, because the backfield's so not inconsistent. But I mean, they don't have any experience back there, especially with Turbin being out the first 4 weeks. So a lot of this is going to be on the back of Andrew Luck. Unfortunately, it all comes back to Andrew. This is absolutely going to end up being where Luck has to be again. You know, he's got some pieces. There's a lot of fun thoughts with that, between Frank Reich's ability to draw up a unique play for the offenses, or for Andrew Luck's ability to be able to execute it and kind of move through his progressions and make some big plays. But then you've got a lot of unknowns, is how these guys work together, how these groups grow. And then you've got the inexperience factor in the backfield as well as the wide receivers. So the offense is going to rely a ton on Andrew Luck. So we're still kind of waiting to see all this come together. But you know, there was definitely some large spurts in camp where this offense looked pretty impressive. So a lot to do up front, and I think that offensive line really has to grow together. And I think that we'll see 2 or 3 different combinations of offensive linemen, to be quite honest with you, throughout the first several weeks of the season, just to kind of find out who fits where and how well they work together.
Yeah, well, as a Bengals fan, and just as a football fan in general, I think a matchup that's going to be so incredible to watch is Geno Atkins versus Quinn Nelson. You have one of the better 3 techniques in the game going up against maybe the best guard to come out in this decade. But a matchup that I think some Bengals fans may not be too happy about is Jack Doyle, the tight end, going up against the Bengals defense. Bengals defense typically in recent history is just god-awful against tight ends. And your new head coach, Frank Reich, an offensive mind, he helped Zach Ertz elevate his game in Philadelphia. Philadelphia's offense is one of the best for tight ends. Do you think that Doyle, in the Colts community, he's obviously a great player, and I think he's more of an unheralded name, maybe not in that national sense yet. Do you think Reich's history with involving tight ends in his scheme will elevate to Doyle into that national conversation?
I don't know, because he's got a legitimate number 2 kind of lightning in a bottle type player with Eric Ebron to help him in that position. You know, last year it wasn't that way. They had to rely on Jack Doyle because there simply wasn't enough, or a tight end that was really going to be able to complement his skill set. and it was use Jack to be the H-back, use Jack in line, use Jack as a, in the slot. They've even split him out. So it was, they know that they can do a lot with Jack. That's the beauty of Jack Doyle. Now, how much of a, like, if you want to say, get into the national conversation, I don't know that he'll always be on the cusp of that, I think, to be quite, because he's not fast, extremely fast. He is one of the most precise route runners on this team, though, at any position. And that's one thing that gets him open as well. So he's got the ability. He's definitely got the work ethic and the drive to do all these things. That it's hard to say that he would. He would have to have a ton. You almost think that for some reason Eric Ebron and Luck weren't on the same page or something like that. Then you kind of almost think that maybe Doyle will start getting the lion's share of the receptions. But Eric Ebron brings a nice dynamic to this team, I think. I still think that Jack Doyle gets the more of the two as far as targets and such. I don't know that it'll be that much of a separation, though. And I think that'll actually benefit Jack Doyle. He'll actually be able to focus a little more on the things that he's actually best at, and that is some inline blocking, some solid chipping, some of the short drag routes and stuff like that to get himself open, because people forget about him, and he can pick up yardage, but he's not that lightning guy. You can use him in the seam, but you're not, it's going to be a 50-50 ball because he's not beating anybody necessarily over the top on a straight seam route. So it's those kind of things. Ebron, on the other hand, you do have that. And I think that's it'll allow Jack to roam a little bit more as well, but he'll have it free of having the burden completely placed on him.
Talking with Matt Danley of Colts Cast and the Stampede Blue SB Nation Network. We're gonna close up here with you, Matt. I appreciate the time. A couple of just quick questions. I gave our previous guest, Willie Anderson, a kind of a rapid fire question, if you will, and I guess I'll kind of do the same with you here on this one. What's the biggest difference between Chuck Pagano and Frank Reich with this team?
Accountability, like legitimate accountability. You know what I mean? These guys look at Frank Reich, I think, more as and I've used this comparison, it may be awful, but I think that at least when I say it, you guys will understand. When players looked at Chuck, they looked at him like Uncle Chuck. They look at Frank Reich and it's their dad. And that's, I think, the difference, to be honest with you. It's something like that. Cool Uncle Chuck, great guy, not great in the clutch. Frank Reich, you better be in there in the clutch being ready to play or you're not going to play. You know what I mean? Those kind of things. And I think that that's kind of embedded in his approach, more businesslike, very down to it, but also very real, very real. You've gotten a lot of that with Chris Ballard. And now I think Frank Reich brings some of those same traits as well. And I think the players are really responding to it. Okay. And prediction on how week 1 plays out. Oh, man. I think we're like a 3-point dog at home right now. Is that right? I actually, that's a good question. I'll have to look that up for you. Let's say, I think we are. I think at least the other day, I think the Colts were, 3-point underdogs, but at home, it kind of surprised me. But then at the same time, it doesn't so much. I think that the pass rush from Cincy is really strong and is going to be really hard for the Colts to deal with, because it's not a group. It's not a subset of that group that really puts it on. And this is what Frank Reich's always talked about. He wants waves of defensive linemen. And that's kind of what Cincinnati's got right now between them and their front seven in general. And I think that that's something that the Colts are going to struggle to deal with. Interior-wise, I think the Colts will be better at fending some of that off. But, that pressure's still going to get there. The Colts have to be extremely dynamic in their route running. And I think that they've got to win at the line of scrimmage. That's huge for this wide receiver group, It's hard to say, honestly, because we don't know anything about either one of these teams, honestly, right now. That's so hard. But I mean, the truth of the matter is, if I'm just looking at complete teams right now, I look at Andrew Luck that he's going to have a solid game. If we're guessing, go average, 2 or 3 touchdowns and maybe a interception. You know what I'm saying? A fairly one way or the other kind of game. How much of the defense makes a difference for Cincinnati, I think, is something that's, like I said, a real issue. And I think you can't – your guys' offense actually has an offensive line now. I think you guys boosted some of that, right? A little bit? A little bit, yeah. At least from last year, though. Yeah. Moving in the right direction anyways, correct? Yes. Yeah, that's a big deal. And, and when you do that and you've got, Dalton isn't a guy who's going to throw 50 touchdowns a game or a season, but he definitely is a guy that, can have some big games. he's very kind of just low and level and does his job that day, or he gets something, you know what I mean, or he explodes, and then one way or the other down as well. I just think that he's even enough, especially in week one when things are just being thrown out there defensively, offensively. I think he's good enough to keep them level enough to probably do about what they should expect to do, is win by 3, maybe, 4. I think that that's reasonable, that the, Bengals up. I would take the Bengals in 4 personally.
Well, okay. So yeah, you say the Colts are 3-point dogs at home, and I think the over under, it looks like, is 47 is the over under point total on that one there. So go figure there. And you make an excellent point, Matt, about these two teams. I mean, it's fun because they're close in terms of geography and proximity. Right. They've got a bit of history together and all of that. These two teams are figuring themselves out, especially early in the season. And I think the Colts are they're hanging a lot of things on Andrew Luck in the hopes that he's going to be, somewhere, if not very close to or at the level he was right before the injury. And I think the Bengals have a lot of fun, nice skill position weapons, some good pass rushers, but offensive line still is a little bit of a question. And they're coming off of 2 straight losing seasons. So and both teams seem to be in a bit of transition. So a very interesting matchup going forward in week 1. We thank you for helping us break it down, taking the time out. Quickly, where can people find your stuff again?
At mdainleysb on Twitter. You can get my stuff on Stampede Blue and the Stampede Blue Colts cast if for some reason a Bengals fan wants to listen to a Colts podcast.
Well, I think we do have quite a few listeners that tune into opposition's shows and all that kind of stuff. So thank you so much for coming on. I appreciate it. I know John appreciates it. Try and have some fun this Sunday regardless of the result, huh?
Absolutely, fellas. Good luck. Thanks for having me on. I had a great time.
All right. Take it easy.
All right.
That was Matt Dainley with Stampede Blue, SB Nation's Colts website, and helping us break down things here at the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. We've had such a jam-packed show, John. I forgot to mention, you can get this show on SoundCloud, iTunes, YouTube, CincyJungle.com, Stitcher, Google Play app, all that stuff. So go get it there. And we appreciate everyone tuning in live. This has been a whirlwind show, but it's been a hell of a lot of fun. John, quickly, because we're kind of running up on time here a little bit. Give me just a couple of keys, since we talked a lot about the Bengals and the Colts matchup here with Matt. Give me a couple of your keys to a Bengals victory coming up here on Sunday. I mean, they can be obvious. They can be maybe something that are a little bit more nuanced, but a couple of things you think that the Bengals really need to do well or prohibit in order to start the season off 1-0.
They need to attack the ball downfield because, as Matt alluded to, they don't have a lot of capable guys in the secondary besides a Malik Hooker or maybe a Quincy Wilson. But the Bengals have an advantage in the passing game, and Dalton has a legitimate chance to throw for over 300 yards against maybe one of the worst secondaries in the league. And on defense, I think they need to hit Andrew Luck early because he is coming back from his injury, and we don't know if he's going to be standing tall in the pocket. It's kind of the quarterback that he is. He's a tough guy, but they also have an advantage in the pass rush against an offensive line that's still coming together. So they need to hit him early. And even though Matt kind of downplayed Jack Doyle's vertical ability, I still think that, he's a tight end. So naturally he's capable of ripping the Bengals defense apart. So we say this every week, I guess, but how can they limit tight ends? Doyle is one of the more underrated tight ends, and Eric Ebron at the very least is a good athlete and is capable of working the seam. So they're going to have to find a way to stop that because they have T.Y. Hilton on the outside. William Jackson will presumably be going up against him multiple times during the game, and the middle field has to take account of Doyle and Ebron.
All great points. I'm going to kind of use a theme we talked about the past couple of weeks when we've talked about the Bengals and what they've done in the preseason and not done in the preseason. We've talked about how, the offensive line and the new guys on the offensive line seem to be seem to be able to be a little more stout in pass protection than in the past couple of years, which is good to see. But they are struggling against the run. They're struggling to create space in the run game. So I think maybe, kind of to your point about going downfield and doing that, use the pass to kind of set up the run late. And you don't want to necessarily put the ball in Andrew Luck's hands per se, but there's going to be inevitable rust from Andrew Luck. I mean, what level that rust is at, I don't know. But I think, if the Bengals can spread the ball out a little bit, almost use some pass plays as quote-unquote run plays, screens and things of that nature, go deep every once in a while, I think then maybe they get a little bit of a lead, and then things start to open up front. They could then pound the ball a little bit, hog the clock, and then take Luck and the arm out of the equation, if you will, at some point, and then tee off on him in the passing game. It's all cliche, but and usually you say, "Oh, run the ball to set up the pass," but I think it's a little bit the opposite. I think the Bengals need to kind of get creative, exploit some of the Colts' weaknesses in that secondary, and then then take control of the game in terms of the scoreboard, manage the clock well, and hopefully get out of there with a win. This is an away game, but it's not really an away game. I mean, it's like an hour and a half drive or something, I think, from Cincinnati. So not truly an away game. So, but I think, as Matt said, I think it's going to be a very interesting matchup going forward, because these two teams are definitely trying to figure out who they are, what they want to do, and exploit each other's weaknesses. I think there's a lot of reflective issues going on with both of these teams. I think they're both on the uptick. If you do read some of Bleacher Report's stuff that they put out there, they put like 5 teams that could be sleepers this year in terms of going to the playoffs and going far. 3 teams that just I know off the top of my head, they had both the Bengals and the Colts, and then they had the Giants as teams that people could be sleeping on. I think there's a couple of others in there too. But so, I mean, it's interesting. I mean, Colts have the new coach, new culture, perhaps, but we'll see. I think it'll be a relatively close game, regardless. But I do think the Bengals probably come out victorious, maybe by a pretty thin margin. Do you agree, John?
It always seems to be close against the Colts. It was a 1-point game last year.
Yeah.
They had another one of those signature Dunlap batted ball, turn it interception plays. It'll definitely be within a touchdown for sure, because it's week 1 and it's on the road. Even though the Bengals might be a little bit better on paper, they're going to have a tough time against a good quarterback. Yep.
Rick Reed in the live YouTube chat says Bengals 31, Colts 20. So he's a little more optimistic than we are. Jason Von Stein says, I think we win this game. I think Vegas also thinks so. So whatever you want to take into account on that front, do so. We're going to get out of here with just a couple of listener questions because we're kind of running up against time. We're going to open up the phone line, but only let's only do text just because of time constraints. If you got a text you want to send us, 949-542-6241, go ahead and send us a text there, or leave us a question in the live YouTube chat. You can also get at us on Twitter at BengalsOBI if you got a quick question there. So check that out and get us a question. I saw some earlier, John, so let's get after it. Ooh, this is a good one from Michael Myers. Just for fun, does anyone agree, and I think he got a lot of no's to this answer, but just for fun, does anyone agree if the Bengals should have traded 2 first-round picks for Mac if Dunlap didn't get extended?
Michael Myers listens to our show. This is incredible. I would have the trade that I proposed was back in early August. It was Dunlap and a first for Khalil Mack. I think Dunlap could have been a part of a deal. I think if Dunlap didn't agree to a deal and he was still on the team, probably not the best option to give up 2 firsts for Mack when their position at the defense line is already strong. But I would have been at least open to the idea of dealing Dunlap to the Raiders, who seem to take in a lot of Bengals players nowadays. I think that would have been very reasonable. Dunlap in a first for one of the very best pass rushers in the game. Pair him on the opposite side of Carl Lawson for the future. I think I would have been down for it, just because the salary cap is not as restricted as people may think it is. And whether or not Mike Brown wants to admit it or not, they could have afforded it, and it would have made the team better. So I'm always for those kinds of moves.
Yeah, and you know, fortunately and unfortunately, the Bengals have, and Marvin Lewis like their defensive ends as a certain stature. You know, the 6'6", 6'7", 280, 290 guys with the big wingspan that, yeah, they're not getting double-digit sacks every year, but they're batting balls down. They're doing other things. They're setting the edge against the run, for better or for worse. That's what they've committed to. Khalil Mack, at least from a pass rushing standpoint, would likely be an upgrade, like you mentioned. The thing is, I mean, first round picks, yeah. I mean, it's a lot of capital to give up, but I think the Bears actually got a third round pick back.
And they finessed the second. I don't know how they did it, but they finessed the second.
Yeah, so they got that, and then you know, they did you know, they gave Khalil Mack a mega extension there, but you know, it's kind of like, you know, how confident are you in your team at this point? Because, you know, if you think that you're pretty close to the playoffs and this guy might be the guy that puts you to, you know, could push you to it, and you're maybe picking in the 20s again over the next couple of years without this guy, then, you know, maybe this is the guy that puts you over the edge, and that's worth it. I know the Bengals highly should they or could they have done it? Yeah, I mean, it'd be fun and exciting and cool. They would never, ever, ever have done it. Ever. Not under this ownership. Never, ever.
But the Bears do make sense because Trubisky's still on that rookie deal, and they have flexibility with that. So. Yep.
Good question though. Pretty fun. Let's see. I guess I see. Kenneth McClendon. Your thoughts on our run game week 1? O-line seems shaky. I don't know if the Colts have a stout run defense. This is kind of stuff we tied into with Matt here, but what are your basically thoughts on the run game and especially the matchup this week? And he also has some fantasy questions because he has Mixon, and he wants to know if Mixon is probably worth a play this week.
So I avoided Mixon in my fantasy draft because I think the Bengals run game is bad until they aren't. I think that's just the reality that it is. And until they prove that they can have stability there, that they can have consistency, and they don't have all these negative plays when they try to run off the edge and on the outside, they're just an underwhelming group. And we still haven't seen this offensive line completely gel together. These are 4 new starters from last year's week 1. So it's going to take some time before we get any sense of consistency and continuity from them. So I personally wouldn't start Mixon until, you know, they can prove that they can work with him with that offensive line. I don't think the Colts are that good at run defense, but it's just so too questionable for me.
Yeah, and this is another one. I think it's from Dean Burke here. Basically going back to Mark Walton, is his preseason performance, because first of all, I've never seen so many people up in arms about a number 3, number 4 running back position on a roster. I mean, so many people were so pissed off about, you know, how that played out and how Brian Hill should have been the guy over Mark Walton. And it's like, dude, come on, let's slow the roll a little bit. But I mean, do you think that Walton's performed? I personally think that I would say probably 75 to 80% of what I saw from Walton in terms of his lack of preseason success had to do with the guys in front of him and or scheme, because there was a Pro Football Focus tweet that was put out that said he was hit. He was the number 1 player in the preseason who was hit the most at or behind the line of scrimmage when he got the ball. So, but I do think some of that has to maybe do with his running style and not gelling with the offensive line. There is something to be said there too, but that's my opinion. What do you think? Do you think people are being a little too hard on Mark Walton? Or do you think, you know, maybe this guy either isn't fully healthy or doesn't have it, or I don't know.
I don't think we should be indicting Mark Walton just because of the, like, all you have to do is watch preseason. You can tell that once he got the ball, the line of scrimmage was like reset in his face. Like he had nowhere to go, and it was just unfortunate. It's not indicative of his ability. I think where people are getting mad is that, was the Walden pick really necessary with what they already had? And I think their resentment with that reality kind of came out on Walden's play in the preseason. Like, it's preseason, doesn't really matter. No one remembers preseason production. It's not, and it's not who Walden is as a running back. He's capable of producing much better. I think it's just, he wasn't truly needed. They didn't really need to spend a 4th-round pick on a running back, especially when they had questions in the offensive line. But overreaction to meaningless preseason production against, unfavorable circumstances, to say the least.
Yeah, and his carries will definitely be limited this season going forward. But I think he has shown the ability to catch the ball in college, and I think that's, to be honest with you, I don't want to say it's going to be the biggest contributor from Joe Mix and Gio Bernard and Mark Walton and company, but I think they're going to be asked to do that a lot. And I think it goes back to using the pass to set up the run, setting up screens, all that kind of stuff, because these guys can do that, and they can follow blocks. Obviously, Bernard has the longest track record of being successful in that capacity, but Mixon has shown that he can do that, and I think Walton will show that as well. Bengals also kept Trey Carson on the final roster there, and obviously Walton and Carson will probably be asked to do quite a few things on special teams, and I think that's probably, the Bengals probably felt that Walton had more special teams upside over Hill, right? That's why they kept him.
Yeah, they raved about his special teams ability when he was drafted, and that's pretty much why he was a lock to make the roster in the first place.
Yep. Well, thanks for the questions, guys. We're going to get out of here. It has been a jam-packed show. We started off the program with Bengals legend Willie Anderson, talking about the current state of the Bengals, the past state of the Bengals, and many other topics. John and I discussed both the final roster and some keys to victory this week for the Bengals against the Colts. And then we had Matt Danley of the SB Nation site, Stampede Blue, and the Colts cast. Great guest as well. So we were jam-packed, a lot of good stuff. You can get this program on SoundCloud, iTunes, YouTube, CincyJungle.com, Stitcher, and the Google Play app. So get our program there. We might have some changes in terms of format and other things coming down the pike, but we will be sure to let you know about that. In the meantime, enjoy this episode. Let's hope the Bengals get a win in week 1, and then maybe carry that into week 2 and get another win, which seems like a winnable game at home. But God, John, it's primetime week 2. Ay. Real quickly before we get out of here, are you the prime? We'll talk about this more next week. But are you a believer in the primetime curse thing, or are you kind of like, well, it is what it is, and they just play better? I'm curious about that.
Yeah, it happens every time, so it's just useless to believe it doesn't exist. So sure, yeah, it exists. It's not technically primetime, it's on one channel, but the moon is out, so Marvin Lewis just diminishes to a child. So
oh, I love it. Yeah, it's so true. Oh my God. Well, that'll be a good topic for next week. I hope we can talk about that next week. Thanks for everything, man. Thanks for coming on, and you bring it as always, and you've been a great addition to the show, so I appreciate it.
Let's keep it going.
Yeah, let's do it. And let's hope next week we'll be talking about a 1-0 start by the Cincinnati Bengals as they go to Indianapolis and play the Colts. Thanks for everyone for tuning in live and for submitting your questions. I apologize. We kind of limited the questions a little bit. We just had, a lot going on in this episode, but I feel like we got to a lot, so that's good. But tune in next week. We've got a lot more coming, and we're pretty stoked about the direction of the show, especially of late. We're pretty stoked about things. So keep it here. Keep it at CincyJungle.com for all of the updates, news, opinion, analysis, and we will talk to you next week. Let's go 1-0. Who day?